Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. It's the 13th of May, 2015. And yes, I know it sounds like a cliche, but this year is indeed flying along. My website is thomassheridanarts.com. If you want to help me out, you can buy a book there, or even just share the articles if you're broke or you've already read the books and the videos at my YouTube channel, Thomas Sheridan Arts. You could always subscribe there too. I trust you're keeping well. We're going to have an interesting show tonight. Our last week's show kind of gone down in history already. It was a comedy show and I was in flying form. And you all sent me tremendous emails thanking me about it, saying it was the best laugh you've had in ages. And good, I'm delighted to hear I'll have a lot more of that kind of thing in future. But this week I'm going to concentrate on a somewhat serious topic. Well, we're going to talk about ancient Irish mythology. There's a lot of guff and a lot of nonsense out there in the alternative research community. No, not that one, but I mean the alternative scene in general. There's a lot of nonsense out there about that basically everything from people mispronouncing names incorrectly to they're just wrong, or they just spin a kind of an Atlantis kind of aspect to it. I just deal with what the actual mythology is, and we're going to be delving into that tonight, which with a kind of an editorial swing about it. I will, again, those of you, only a couple tickets left now. There's AV6 in Daventry this weekend. If you go look for our Alternative View website, AV6 in Daventry this weekend, I'll be there, a whole bunch of other speakers, and I do hope you can come along and see me. Now, let's talk about the subject of ancient Irish mythology from a personal point of view first. Well, it's a very interesting thing because my first introduction to Irish mythology was in school, in primary school. It's when I first learned about the Nafina and Cuchulainn and Finn McCool and Tuatha Dé Danann and all these groups. Now, what was, looking back on it now, what was very suspicious, well, I won't say suspicious, but, well, maybe it is, but almost kind of irritating about this, was that these mythologies, there was two aspects to how they, shall we say, educated, and I mean that in the purest sense. They educated us with these stories. One, I have no memory of them not being taught through the Irish language. I have no memory of learning about them through English in school. And growing up on the east coast of Ireland, English was not my first language. I struggled all through school with Irish. Tremendous difficulty with it. And so it's impossible for me to see any kind of depth or any kind of deep meaning or even an enjoyment of the adventure stories for what they were from my childhood, for that simple reason that they were conveyed to us in Irish. And so we would read a passage from a book, and then a school teacher who was some Neanderthal with a toupee who'd been, shipped down the mountains because he could smell red meat, would give us a condescending narrative and description of what the story was about before we launched back into Irish. And it was all terribly confusing, for me especially. The other aspect of this, and it's a very interesting one too, is how we were always told in no uncertain terms that these stories were absolutely 100% fictional. They were pure mythology. They were not rooted in any history. They were just fairy tales, Irish fairy tales. And we were not supposed to see them in any way other than Irish fairy tales. As time went on, I think I was about 12, and we went on a school trip to Newgrange, and actually the Boyne Valley Monuments in County Meath, about 50 miles north of Dublin. And it just blew my mind as a kid, being inside this passage tomb, which I found quite amazingly claustrophobic and scary to be in there. But it just blew my mind. And this was before Newgrange was developed into a tourist mecca like it is today. Although it's still worth visiting, but it's very organized, very touristy. And, but that's kind of killed that aspect of it. And then a visit to Tara and then looking over the vista from the top of Tara, it struck me there was something more to these stories than just fairy tales. That became apparent at a very early age. And I remember when I started to look at Irish graphic design, and in particular the early history of the Irish state, the graphic design level was absolutely phenomenal. Posters, government posters, even advertising posters. There was this thing called the Gaelic Revival that happened in the 1890s, and it wasn't only about the Irish language and sports, but it also dealt with the revival of Irish graphics and design, and some tremendous examples of mythological imagery conveyed in an almost Art Deco form in 1920s and 30 graphics as the state was being founded. And I always remember one particular poster that I saw for the electricity supply board when they had built the Ardnacrusha power station on the Shannon. They had this phenomenal poster of Cuchulainn in his chariot, and the wheels of the chariot were driving the electricity to power the nation. So you could see how in the early days of the Irish state, from 1923 on, there was a concerted effort to actually incorporate our ancient mythology within the narrative of a new emerging nation. Of course, this was all destroyed by the late 1930s when Eamon de Valera came into power, formed an Irish Republic out of the Irish Free State, and basically handed the nation over to the Vatican. And we became this like fanatically Catholic nation. And basically all our... And I believe Eamon de Valera was possibly a British agent. There's some very good documentation to, well, should we say theories to back that up. And he basically handed Ireland over to the Vatican, and we became this mad Catholic nation. And we really lost that sense of magic in terms of our mythology that the early founders of the state, of the original Irish Free State, before the formation of the Republic under Eamon de Valera, were trying to achieve. Now, there's millions and millions of books on the subject out there. There's lots of videos. A lot of them are horrible. Now, there's two absolute great works on this. One of them is called Everyday Life of the Pagan Celts by Anne Ross. Now, it deals specifically with the Celtic mythology. It's published on Batsford. It's impossible to get now. You'll probably have to get a PDF you can download online. If you get a hard copy, it's a treasure because there's lots of wonderful photographs in it. Another one for people living on these islands, an absolute must, is a pelican book by Stuart Piggott called Druids. Now, what makes Stuart Piggott's book on the Druids so particularly interesting is that he went to the trouble. He was the first popular non-fiction writer on the subject of Celts and Irish and British prehistory to openly question the propaganda that had been basically cultivated by the Roman Empire up until that point. You've also the movie The Wicker Man, where you see that, Edward Woodward, great film by the way, is being burnt at the end in A Wicker Man by Lord Summerisle, played brilliantly by Christopher Lee in that wonderful 1973 film. The reality is the only reference we have for this kind of thing is Roman references, which, remember, would be weaponized propaganda. In fact, the Romans used to say a lot of things about the Celts. Now, remember, the Celts, we're talking about an Irish-British context, would have drawn from their culture earlier other cultures, which I will talk about in a bit. And even within the propaganda, there are gems of truth. Specifically in the way the Romans mention in an almost, shall we say, coveting way, in an almost envious way, the power of the bard in Celtic society. The ability of a bard. Now, a bard is not just a poet or a musician who sings songs. In these societies, in both Celtic Irish, Celtic Britain, and pre-Celtic Irish society, remember, the Celts were not the first ones to come to Ireland, or the first culture in Ireland. The bard was a magician. The bard is the ultimate defense against the psychopath. This is why I model myself on a bard. The bard writes a satire that can bring down a psychopath, leader, cult leader, any kind of fool like that. Anyone who follows me knows how how important and intrinsic satire has always been to me in my life and my work, because it allowed me to take down these sort of pathological authority structures, not only on a macro level but also on a micro level. Since the time I was a kid, if I was being bullied in school, I would draw pictures of the bully, doing something funny, or else I would write a song or a poem about him. And this kind of thing. This is the bard spirit. This is something that I'm very much interested in. It's probably instinctual to me and who I am and how I've lived my life. A lot of people, shall we say, of the more truth persuasion, watch my Facebook page and they're clearly as thick as 2 pounds of hard shite. They do not get the fact that when actually taking the piss and having a laugh, what I'm doing is being involved in a form of satirical magic. This is a way for me to defend and protect myself because of who the person I am, the notoriety I have, and so on. The smart people, who are the majority of the people on my Facebook page, completely and totally get it. They totally get what I'm up to and what I'm doing, because an element of that bardic spirit within them. And so the bard was an intrinsical and powerful aspect of those societies. Now, those 2 books I mentioned, the book I'm going to be referencing from tonight, I'll be reading it as well as giving my kind of editorial swing along it, is a small book written by a guy called Jack Roberts down in Galway, and it's called The Sacred Mythological Centres of Ireland, an illustrated guide. It's a hard one to get, but look out for it. If I can help this guy sell them on a website, I will. I will talk to him. I know a friend of his. I like the way he writes. I like the way he discusses these things, because it's very similar to how I feel about these things. As I said, we were told that these were mythological stories with no basis in foundation, yet I live right next to a fort called the Hill of Usheen. Usheen was the son of Finn McCool. So if this person didn't exist, why are all these monuments and these natural hills, all these sites, all named after this guy? Another thing, too, is that the geography in these stories, not just approximate. For instance, in the Arthurian legends, you have places called the Isle of Avalon and so on. But in the Irish mythological canon, particularly coming from the Irish annals, the geographic locations are absolutely specific. They're specific places that you can go visit today, and there they are. Now, another thing that sort of decouples the idea of these stories being purely mythological, shall we say, is that the art annals are also used when it suits the academics to validate real history. For instance, the Irish annals have tremendous and well-validated and, shall we say, verified histories of the Viking attacks, not only but also, the Viking raids, should we say, also in Northumbria and parts of Scotland. They're totally accurate and correct. So we were told in school, when the Irish annals wrote about the Vikings, it was 100% the bad Vikings, it was 100% correct. When the Irish annals wrote about the wonderful Christian saints, it was 100% correct. However, when the same scribes, the same historians wrote about ancient Irish mythology, it was fairy tales. And that's why I don't believe it was fairy tales. Why would they go to the trouble of writing very specific histories regarding 2 other aspects of Irish history, and then the third would just be a mythology, even though it's conveyed within the Irish annals as fact? They do not undermine it as calling it mythology. This is something that academic scholars came about later on. Now, let me read this to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. And pardon me if I throw in my stream of consciousness. I will try to tell you when I'm breaking from the dialogue and, giving my own editorial. The sacred landscape of the goddesses. Nature and landscape were of crucial importance to the people of former ages and mythology, especially that the earlier cycles expresses the intimate relationship between humanity and the natural world. To an older, more traditional society, the land was not merely an inanimate material, but was considered to be suffused with life or spirit, and of the utmost importance, was considered to be ruled over by the highest of all divinities. In all of these older societies, this ultimate deity has always been represented by the figure of a goddess. The goddesses of the ancient world are often overlooked, and the fact that older traditional cultures were orientated upon female deities is often regarded as an arbitrary aspect of the older system. Yet virtually all of the most sacred places in the landscape retain a very close association with female spirits and goddesses. Now remember, we're talking about in the Irish context here, but this is common all over the world. And in the traditional mythologies associated with the land that are a primary feature. The ancient sacred centres of Tara and around the whole structure of the old traditional system revolved still retain the most specific associations with the old goddesses. All its former ceremonial centres are still named after their tutelary goddesses, the goddess who presided over each area. One of the most important traditions, and the last to die out amongst the last of the ruling classes, was that of the sacral kingship, wherein the rulers inherited their position through the ancient banfis ceremony, the ritual marriage to the goddess of the land, which was ceremonially enacted at the sacred centres. So king had to actually physically marry the goddess of the land. Ireland has always had a particularly close association with its ancient goddesses, and in mythological histories it has always been named after them. Erin or Erin means literally the land of the goddess Eru. It is recorded that Amirgin, sacred of the Gaels or Milesians, swore a promise that the land would always be named after her. Eru is a goddess of the mythical Sheridan, the spirit people, who descended into the earth after they were overthrown by the Gaels. In the landscape of Ireland, this descent was specifically regarded as a return to the fairy mounds and sacred caves. Breaking from the text, this is why there's a belief that the Druid Dana, similar to the Elnar, that's the risen Viking berserkers in Valhalla, will break through at the end of the world to save Ireland. In the same way, the berserkers at the right hand of Odin will break out of Valhalla's long haul to save humanity from Loki and interference. See, we're seeing commonalities here, and we'll be talking about this as the rest of the show goes on. In the landscape of Ireland, this descent was specifically regarded as return to fairy mounds and sacred caves. This legend symbolized an ancient and long-term reality understood by all peoples who come and settle here. It may be possible to conquer, but to endure upon this. It is necessary to court the goodwill of Eru and her all-powerful goddesses. And this is the whole point, that any invasion force that comes to Ireland must pay homage and respect, if not enter into a marriage with the goddess Era or Eru. The mythological cycle of ancient Ireland. The mythology of Ireland consists of a large range of legends and stories that were handed down through oral tradition. Remember, oral tradition is the most accurate method of conveying information of all, for generations, and written down by scribes during the early Christian period. This literature is contained in a store of records made at various times from the 7th century. Most of our references recorded during the medieval period as late as the 17th century. These mythologies are divided into 4 categories: mythological cycle, the Fenian Ossianic cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the historical cycle, or the cycle of kings as is more commonly known. The first of these, the mythological cycle, emanates from a very ancient source and deals with such matters such as the formation of the primary goddesses and gods. In these tales, the essential characteristics of the ancient divinities can be seen, giving an understanding of the essential structure of the ancient pantheon. The Dagda is the principal sun god sun god of the earliest peoples of Ireland, the Lord of knowledge, the all-knowing, as Zeus was to the Greeks, and similar to the concept of God, and likewise similar to Odin also. In the mythological cycle, he is referred to as Urafasa, Lord of perfect knowledge, and like his counterparts in the ancient world, he was the father of all, or the Eracha Onahea. The Dagda is the father of Angus and Angus MacInnog, the lord of the Bruna Boyne. That's the River Boyne that's in County Meath, where where I told you where I visited as a kid, where Newgrange and Note and so on are located. And all the lesser gods. Fesh or Fis means occult knowledge. The Dagda is a supreme magical entity which the powers of wizardry beyond all the lesser gods. But the Dagda do not reign as the absolute supreme, for all the powers of gods is combined in the limits of the goddess, the Seratrix, the All. The most important goddess in Eastern Ireland was the Bonad, the cow goddess, whose most sacred centres in the Bruna Boyne is the bend in the Boyne, or the Boyne River of the white cow goddess of Bond, is also the Divine River. Now the reason why the Boyne is the Divine River is because the ancient peoples believed that the Boyne, the River Boyne, which comes from the port of Drogheda and winds its way up into the Irish countryside, was a earthly representation of the Milky Way in heaven. In fact, there's some very good theories to suggest that the location of Newgrange in relation to the Boyne is very similar, reflected as the as above, so below, macro-microcosm level, this is me talking by the way now, of the seminal fluid emanating from the, shall we say, they call it the belt of Orion, but the Celts or the ancient peoples of Ireland, like Dan and Maeve, seen it as the penis of Orion, and therefore the Milky Way travelling across the sky was the seminal fluid of this god, this male hunter god in the sky, and therefore Newgrange was built at the site of the below in a similar location to the Milky Way and to the Orion Nebula as the ejaculation of the god. Therefore, the creation of this place on Ireland was no different than the creation of the Milky Way in the heaven. To be a bit conspiratorial about it, I find it very interesting that that was the location where the Battle of Boyne was fought in 1690 between King James of England and, well, of Scotland, and King William of England and Holland and the Royal House of Orange to completely to the Irish forever. That was the idea of that battle. The most important, the god, we still got that bit right. The Bona Brua, or the Boa, is the cow goddess, and she is the wife of Dagda, or the god Dawn, and the ancient creation myth begins with the ritual mating between these primary deities. From this, this is why Middle Eastern religion is so ridiculous. The idea that one, there was nothing and then there was just the God who created the earth, when every other tradition has the idea of a cataclysmic mating, be it an actual mating between men and humans, gods and people, gods and other gods, or even planets of different forces. There's always the idea of two coupling to make the one, to create the universe. It's very common in heathen traditions. Makes much more sense because that's how it happens in real life. From this union, the most powerful sun god, the greatest of the lords of light, Angus, is given birth. This act always takes place at the river or on a sacred calendrical date or fire festivals upon which the ancient solar calendar was orientated. The sacred act is mostly associated with Samhain, that's Halloween, which is regarded at the time when the lights or sexual power is at the greatest. That's why women are always horny around that time of year, as well as the spring. I'm not being sex, that they just are. They just are. The cosmic union is remembered in the mythologies connected to many of the ancient sacred centres, but particularly to the greatest of the ancient centres. The Boyne Valley, or the Bruna Boyne, was the first occupant of Elkmar, the original husband of the Boneland. The original name for Newgrange was Bruna Elkmar. The ritual mating between the Dagda and the Boneland is the act of adultery, and they keep the birth of Angus, the god of love. So the Angus is actually a love child of an adulterous relationship from the divine. So this will have huge implications in their society. So for instance, in a Christian society where a child, or a monotheistic Babylonian society where a child is either born out of wedlock or as a union of an affair, the child would be stigmatized and blamed for this. Where in the Celtic, in the ancient Irish Gaelic idea, those children would have been considered magical. In the same way, the Sather, the gay people, the gay effeminate men in Norse society were considered magical also. Isn't that a turn up for the books for what Christianity teaches? You see, this is the solution, folks. This is why I'm telling us we have to abandon this sort of Middle Eastern monotheism, get it out of Europe and return to our heathen roots, and we'll be much happier and much more contented societies. And they keep the birth of Angus, the god of love, from the divine Elkmar by the magical trickery of making the sun stop for 9 months while the child is born. Sorry, very rude burping on the air. I just had about 4 cups of tea. Having lost his power, Elkmar is replaced by the now superior magical power of the Dagda. Bua is the primary goddess of ancient Ireland, the personification of the mystical spirituality with life, and is symbolized in the sacred river, or that from which everything is derived. Like the ancient Greco-Roman goddess Gaia, she represents the earth as a living entity. In the ancient cosmologies, it is the goddess who confers the status of godhead upon the Dagda, whose position as god is entirely dependent upon his union with her cosmic force, a cosmological order which is ritualized in the coronation marriage, wherein the status of sovereignty, divinity, is bestowed upon the king by the goddess. The goddess Boand is associated with the source of the river, either as a place where she attains magical knowledge or where she dies. Again, we're back to the idea of the ejaculation. One version relates how she was forbidden to visit the sacred spring, which was guarded by Nectan, the source of the Boyne, where a mound called Carberry Hill is said to be his burial place. Like the biblical myth of Eve eating the apple, judgment descends upon her after she tastes the waters of the spring of knowledge, and the waters well up and drown her. Her death thus gives life to the newborn river, the serpentine spirit of the goddess Boyne. Boand and Bofin, the white cow goddess, who is also symbolized by the moon. This is further symbolized by the sacred trinity of the cow goddess, related to the lunar phases: the red cow, the Bo Rua, for the waxing moon, the brown cow, the Bo Don, and the waning moon for the dark cow, the Bo Oran, or for the new moon. The symbolism inherent in these structures of the primary pantheon is that the sun giving birth to the moon luninations. The symbolism was evident in many of the carved stones found in the Boyne Valley and other sacred centres. Bo represents the very heavens itself, the Milky Way, here we go, the passive white cow, wherein Bo the cow and the heavens are seen sprinkling the sky with her sacred milk to create the stars. As the primary mother goddess, she is related to all the major deities. Anya may be directly connected, for she shares many of the other attributes, while the Kalakbera has been considered as another manifestation of Bo, and Etan wife of Midir, and the daughter of Dagda, but also known as the Mesa Bukala, the noble herdswoman. You see how powerful the female idea is in these cultures, completely different than the monotheistic idea. The ancient Holy Trinity. Now, when you think of the ancient Holy Trinity, what we really think of is the triskel or the triple spiral that appears at these sites. Goddesses are all, and that's also where St. Patrick got his bloody shamrock from. The goddesses are always represented as a triplicacy. 3 is the mystic number of the ancient Holy Trinity, the magical spiritual number relating to the spirit within everything, and which underlines the whole of Celtic mysticism. Poetry was composed from a special literary formula called a triad from the 9th wave. Remember that from the second side of the Kate Bush album? She called it the 9th wave. The 9th wave is really interesting. It is the mystical boundary around Ireland, which the other world, or Tir na Nog, the land of women or the land of youth, resides. So there's an idea very similar to Tolkien's idea of the undying lands of off of Middle Earth that you could only reach by swans. And it's interesting because the swans are a very powerful idea in the Irish pantheon, such as the children of Lear. But the idea there was Ireland, and then beyond Ireland was a mystical world, and in that mystical veil resided the land of Tir na Nog, the land of women or the land of youth. The image of the triple goddess is a very ancient and relates to the three elements: life and abundance, death and war, mysticism and prophecy. Triple symbolism accentuates the power and potency of the goddess, and this is illustrated in that most famous image of the Morrigan, the triple form of the Morrigan or the Moraheen, the great queen, who was the triumvirate compromise, those three primary goddess queens, Maeve, Macta, and the Banfilia of the prophet Bab. Ireland has three ruling goddesses, Eru, Bamba, and Fodla, each of whom represents particular aspects of the land and characterize the nature of the spirit. Eru is symbolized by the Alana Marina, or the Ursnach, where she represents the whole of the island and its people. But Ireland's oldest name is said to be Bamba. Remember that one. This is the first one probably for you people in this alternative community. Bamba. B-A-M-B-A. This is going to become very significant, meaning quite literally the land of women. Ban being Irish, Ba meaning land. Bamba, the land of women. Slieve na Man, which was regarded as the highest point in Ireland, the height of Erin, was also called Slieve na Ban, Bamba's mountain. That means the mountain of the high woman. Whilst Malin Head at the northmost tip of Ireland is known as Bamba's crown, Folad represents the spiritual essence of the land. To divert from this right here, there's a lot of similarities between this and the Sheila na Gig symbol, the woman who holds her vagina opens her mouth. This may be either a Christian corruption of this idea, in that her open mouth represents the Inishowen Peninsula and the Lough Swilly at the top of Ireland, and her open vagina represents the opening of the Shannon, the mouth of the Shannon in County Clare. That's my theory. Well, one of my speculations, shall we say. I know this, for some of you, this is all new to you, and we'll probably have, if you're interested in what I'm talking about tonight, we'll have more shows as we go along. But I'm trying to keep it as basic as possible. But again, we can continue this dialogue, because it is wonderful stuff to learn about. And a lot of Irish people don't even know about this stuff. That's the great tragedy of all. Or they've forgotten about it. The threefold symmetry of the megalithic architecture is monumentally immortalized in the Brú na Bán, with its three great astronomical temples at the central important triple spiral. That said, the three great temples are Note, Tara, and Newgrange. Doubt, sorry. So Newgrange, Note, and Doubt. The Great Brua is sacred to the river goddess Boyne, which forms a triumvirate, and its main tributaries, the Bow and the Bogara. And the meeting of the three waters is an important symbolic theme in mythology. The legendary first woman of Ireland, César, landed at the Cumnana Uisce, at the confluence of the Barrow, Nore and Suir in County Waterford. Important artefacts specifically related to the triple symbolism of the goddess haven't been recovered from many rivers. A bronze disc depicting the Triskel, that's a tree spiral thing, was recovered from the river at the goddess Ban, which also means, woman again, in Ulster, and from the river of the goddess Loa, or Lee, in Cork, came a unique triple-horned helmet that was subsequently used as the emblem of the Cork Historical Society. That's a phenomenal thing if you can dig it up online. Irish dolmens appear to be always set on 3 stones. Remember that? No matter how large the capping stone, the extreme delicacy of which many have been poised on 3 uprights, a beautiful illustration of the ability of the megalith builders to balance and judge the weight of a regular mask weighing many, many tons. The astronomical temples of the Cid. And that's very similar to the Satyrs of the Norse world. Remember, there's so many similarities here. This actually gives some credence to, well, it's actually established fact now, of Doggerland, which existed between the north of England, Scotland, and Scandinavia, which sunk about, I think it was about 10,000 years ago. More than one researcher has referred to Irish mythology as the tales of the seed, or the folklore of the fairy mounds, as it revolves around the ancient belief in spirits which reside within the mounds and caves or fairy hills. The seed are essentially the spirits of the land, and as such the goddesses, gods, and other elements are all but one. But the seed particularly inhabits the ancient mounds, the cave-like chambered cairns, and dolmens, where they represent the tri-unified spirit, or the spirit of the earth, the sky, and the ancestors. The seed represents, this is the fairy world, here's what we're talking about. The seed represent the elemental spirit within the land, and as such they dwell everywhere, or ever present within the land, but there are special places which particularly connect with the spiritual or other world, caves, special mounds, and a whole range of notable or peculiar features such as wildly shaped rocks, springs, this is all simulacras now, wildly shaped rocks, springs, fairy trees, and all these special places were treated with awe and not a little respect by country people who created countless tales and legends around them, preserving thereby the histories of their localities by keeping memory of the ancient earth spirits alive. The sacred centres are marked by ancient structures, most of which date from 4,000 years ago. Many are marked by earthworks, but this early period is known as the megalithic age, and from the hundreds of megalithic monuments that are still left of the thousands that were erected all across the country during this period. Chambered cairns and mounds, passage cairns, court cairns, and many types of dolmen, standing stones, stone rows, and circles. All of the many types of structures that were built in these sacred places, the mysterious cave like the chambered cairns, are the monuments most clearly referred to in mythology: the brew, the seed, the bloga, the fairy houses, the traditional homes of the seed, and the entrances to the other world. In mythology, this is reached through the structures of the megalithic age. Now remember, we're talking about these are not graves, as these, they tell us, they told us in school that Newgrange and Carrowkeel, that these were graves because they found bones in them. It's quite possible that, and also the caves at Kesh, not far from here, which is a spectacular place, the people at later periods may have went to die in them, or maybe been buried in them. Initially, they were considered as portals or stargates into the other world. Whether this was done through psychedelic ingestions of mushrooms, through chanting, through music, through fire illuminating the walls, is another matter altogether. But this is how they were seen. There was a significant element, or should we say aspect, or happenstance, which took place in the 8th century when in the 9th century, when a group of Vikings went into the passage cairn at Newgrange. It's totally verified this. Went in, had a look, and came out. Now, there was nothing in there for them to steal because it was just basically a cave. But it says specifically in the Irish historical record that the Norsemen entered the tunnel or the cave at Brunaboyne. Now, were the Norsemen going in there for a mystical experience? Were they berserkers? Very interesting stuff. Look out for my new book that's coming out soon. Now, there are over 330 chambered mounds of the Boyne culture, mostly distributed across the northern and eastern parts of Ireland, with another 15 or 16 in North Wales that are directly related to the Irish examples. These cairns are conveniently termed passage tombs, which refers to their association with burial customs. Unfortunately, this aspect of their use has overshadowed their more spiritual symbology, for if we preclude the mythic symbology associated with them, they become mere charnel houses, representing the tombs of superiors or kings, and therefore fail to have any understanding of them, as I was saying earlier on, closely related to the monuments of Europe that are called temples. And you could probably by extension also give that to the Great Pyramids at Giza, where nobody has ever been found in them, but they're called graves. This is academic does this over and over again. It sees a large structure with a tunnel inside it. Automatically, it's a grave of a king that was built by slaves. It's a monument to death. Now, the reality is that places like Newgrange, Carrowkeel, Carramore, no doubt, were not monuments to death. They were monuments to life. That's why the sun shone in them on midwinter's morning. This is the symbolic mating of sun and sky to create a new world, a new spring. They were not places of death. They're only place of death to academics. They were places of life to the people who built them. Astronomy, that science which until recent times was held to be closely associated with spirituality, is an essential aspect of all the chambered cairns. Examples such as Newgrange have been proven beyond a doubt to have been created to an extreme astronomical precision, clearly proving the importance of astronomy in the design of the structure. Check out the work of James Swaggart, my friend. You can actually go to Capricorn Radio, and James has done tremendous work on this over the years. And so check out his Capricorn Radio YouTube channel and also his website, James Swaggart. Throughout Ireland and beyond, the astronomical orientation of hundreds of other monuments has been documented. Their alignments with significant solar positions clearly affirming the astronomy was a major preoccupation of the builders. To all ancient peoples, astronomy was a spiritual science or sacred art with regard to heavens as the spirit world, the stars and planets as the night sky being actual deities and the spirits of the ancestors existing in the other worlds. The people who built the mysterious megalithic monuments were regarded by mythology as mystical. They were mostly referred to as the a race who was described from having a divine origin in the heavens and descended to earth. See it all there, and the culture that built these mounds, the people of the stars. This has been interpreted as being reference to their astronomical abilities. There's nothing to do with aliens from outer space coming here from the stars to build these things. God Almighty. It has to do with the fact that these are the people of the stars, meaning they were like the astrologers. They watched the stars and plotted out astronomical patterns, and from this used them to do geosurveying on the ground. The star was the map and it was the blueprint in the sky to cultivate the land below, almost to give, shall we say, a kind of a makeover to the goddess. It has nothing to do with these fuckers coming from space and spaceships and landing on Earth and building these monuments. Learn how to use metaphor, some of you, and allegory. Therefore, the methylitic art that is found and associated with the Boyne culture monuments is a spiritual sacred art. To the peoples of later times, these incomprehensible carvings represented a deep mystery, evidence of the supernatural nature of those who built them. In recent times, such discoveries as the precise winter solstice sunrise alignment at Newgrange have drawn attention towards them again. After centuries of destruction and neglect, and it's still going on, they're still being left in neglect. The first and most illuminating study to show symbolic nature of the art and the monuments was carried out by Martin Brennan in the 1970s. Imagine that, 1970s, before someone actually got in there and had a serious look at these things. All subsequent studies have lent heavily on original vision, meaning they were graves, and that was the end of it. And they had no value, like Irish mythology, has no value. In folklore, the megalithic monuments are nearly always regarded as feminine, are known by the names of goddesses, such as Queen Maeve's tomb up on top of Knocknaray near here. It is common for them to be known names as Cailleach or the Sacred Hag. Most folklore associated with them refers to witches, female spirit, or other female spirit entities. The central feature of the ancient centre of Slieve na Cailleach is the mountains of the Hag and Mead, is the chamber cairn known as the Hag's Cairn, which has a curbstone known as the Hag's Chair. There are countless monuments that are related to various Cailleachs and Hags. In Cork, the largest megalithic type, known as the wedge-shaped gallery grave, is called Laba Lachri, the grave of the Cailleach, and it was found that the single burial of a woman of a mature age, while in West Cork, the largest portal tomb type dolmen in the region standing on a hill near the sea is called Callachine Callagig, the Callachali of the sea. Folklore, to me, from my rudimentary Irish, I would have thought that would be called Callaleg Namara, but I guess I'm wrong. Okay, Namara being by the sea. Folklore sometimes connects famous mythological characters and tales to the monuments, the most well-known being the story of the pursuit of Diarmid and Grania, which relates specifically to Domulans, and many of the known Diarmid and Grania bed is reference to lovers' fight. The story revolves around the sun goddess Grania refusing Finn Macomb and choosing instead his closest friend Diarmid. The jilted Fionn chases the lovers around Ireland, and his druids lay a magic spell on them that they should not sleep on the ground. It is from this that the dolmens are said to be the beds on which they slept in fear of being caught by Finn's druids. The story is a moral epic which ends with Finn grieving over the death of Diarmid. What did they say, bros before hoes? To the reprisal from the Druid de Danann. So he calls on Angus to take Diarmid to be the Brún Báinne to be buried, saying, "Since I cannot restore him to life, I will send his soul into him, so that he may talk to me each day." Isn't that beautiful? Finn obviously regards the sacred Brua for having been more than just a mere burial place. Throughout all the generations since the megalithic monuments were built, they have been regarded as a primary ancestral heritage, striking awe and wonder into the remaining focus of worship even in Christian times. Let me talk about this for a second, about Diarmid and Finn McCool. Now, Diarmid, although he took his woman, Grania, there's a wisdom in that you don't get, say, in Jehovah in the Old Testament, where he strikes down this bastard and wipes out this whole town in revenge. What happens is that Finn is broken-hearted because he understands that his friend meant him no harm when he fell in love with his woman, Grania. And he wanted his friend back. He didn't want to see his heartbreak was compounded twice. These are very beautiful human tales. Mythology is not stupid. See, we're talking about, again, as you see me talk about the Norse mythology, we're talking about a kind of an early form of psychoanalysis to help people. Conveying these stories allows people to deal with real problems in the real world, or to address aspects or issues within their underlying psychology or subconsciousness. Fear of the sea had guaranteed the survival of much of our heritage, and a new age of awe and wonder is emerging with the construction of some of the sacred mounds, which sadly, in the age of willful destruction, is still at hand. It sure is. The ancient cosmological divisions. In its very earliest times, the landscape of Ireland is said to have been shaped by mythic creatures. There is mention of many-legged armoured-plated monsters, the Mata, but the ancient provincial divisions are usually attributed. Now, the ancient provincial divisions are Leinster, Munster, Connacht, where I live, and Leinster, Munster, Connacht, and Ulster. And also Meath was a kingdom at one time, usually attributed to the sacred black pig. And you get valleys all over Ireland named after the black pig. On Mucka Dove, that's how you say it in Irish. You get there's on Mucka is pig and Dove is black, and there's black pig valleys in places like Donegal and all over Ulster. The sacred black pig created such territorial markers as the Black Pig Dykes or Pig's Race. The mysterious ancient border, consisting of a series of earthworks and walls, divides the old province of Ulster, which differs from the later political defined border. That's another reason they messed with our heads as well, and the rest of Ireland, which can still be traced across most of its length. The sons of Partholon are said to have been divided Ireland into 4 parts, and the Nemedians appropriation into 3. But the five sons of the kings of the Firblogs, another mythic race most closely associated with the Cid, shared it between them, declaring that the 5 provinces shall endure forever and ever, and they're still here today, with the exception of Meath, which is now a county. 2 counties, actually. In the most recent systems, there are only 4 provinces, but the Irish word for province is Ceog, or Colch, which means the 5th part. Ulster originally covered the whole northern section and included an area now within Connacht, that would be around here in Sligo, this area here, and during various periods of history, Munster was divided into 2. Leinster, which is on the east coast of Ireland, where Dublin is, was also divided into Tara and other civic ceremonial centres, where in the northern part was known as Royal Meath. But the 5th province of the Firbolg system may have been the Meath, or the middle province, which encloses the Uisneach, or the geographical centre of Ireland. Another prehistoric borderline is formed by the Escalida, the Royal Road, or Sliagmore, the Big Road. And this can be still traced for much of its length in series of glacially formed ridges and eskers, on which was built an important roadway between East and West Ireland. That went between Dublin and Galway Bay, and it went across the Shannon at where Clonmacnoise Cemetery, a huge Christian cemetery, was built. In its western sections, the exact route is unclear, but it's thought to have crossed the Shannon near the ancient monastic centre of Clonmacnoise. So that was most of that I've read from Jack Roberts' The Sacred Mythological Centres of Ireland, an illustrated guide. But there's others out there. If you enjoyed this show, I'd love to do some more for you, and also to bring it into comparative mythologies, not just Norse, but other ones too. Now, this, from my own personal point of view, I find that this mythology, I haven't actually read the stories. Maybe if you were interested in later episodes, I will do it. It's my show. I will read the actual stories for you. And what they do is they're more than just tales. You ever notice when people say how much they love the Lord of the Rings books, Tolkien's books and Tolkien's movies, particularly the Fellowship of the Rings? The reason why that strikes people so deeply is it unleashes archetypal and maybe even DNA memories of how their ancestors lived, or even the stories their ancestors told them. For instance, there's one part in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Rings, Two Towers actually, the Two Towers book and film, where they go to the Dead Marshes, this vast marsh, on their way to bringing the ring to Mordor with Gollum, Sam and Frodo. Now, the Dead Marshes are very similar to the Bog of Allen in the centre of Ireland. The centre of Ireland contains a massive bog, a massive marsh of peat that's probably about the same size as the country of Luxembourg, perhaps even bigger. And the best way to see it today is to take the train from Dublin to Sligo, because it goes over the marsh, or the bog, a Bog of Allen, and you can actually see how vast the thing is. Now, a lot of it has been harvested for both fuel, because peat is Ireland's only natural fuel source, apart from oil, which they won't let us have, and also peat is harvested for agricultural purposes as well, peat moss and so on. Now, when you travel across this, or you go into it even better, especially when you go off the back roads, you are struck by how isolated it is even in the 20th century. It's far more isolated than the mountain regions of Ireland. And that's because it's still quite inhospitable. Unless you have a reason to work there, such as working for Bord na Móna, the peat board who manage the bog, there's no reason really to live there. It's damp, it's humid, it gets very, very hot in summer, very, very cold in winter, and in summer it is crawling with millions of insects. Now, this would have been a very, very formidable thing in the centre of Ireland, because basically you couldn't really hunt anything there. You couldn't do a lot there because it was a gigantic marsh. And so when you watch something, when Irish people watch something like the Two Towers movie or read the book by Tolkien, they're struck by the section dealing with the Dead Marshes, the marshes that Frodo and Sam Frodo almost gets killed by. It's filled with elves, men and orcs that died in great battles, and if you stare into their eyes, you fall into the marsh waters, and believe me, these places do feel like that, and you'll be sucked in by a kind of a demon or a fairy. And so this is why these kinds of stories stick with us, not only because they speak to us in a very different way or subconsciously, but they also unleash not repressed but hidden memories within our subconscious, and they're very, very important to pay attention to. They're very, very important to explore. This is why I've decided more or less this will be the focus. This, along with creativity, will be the focus of my work for the rest of my career. I've done everything else. There's nothing really more to say about psychopaths. There's nothing really more to say about globalization and the effects it's having on us. I've said all I can say. I don't want to be becoming a parrot repeating myself. But this idea, through my interest in Jungian psychology and people like the work of Joseph Campbell, the idea of delving into that world in order to understand this world, construct a roadmap, if you will, is very, very appealing to me. This is why I won't be doing public speaking after AV6, I'm going to retire from that to basically go into a more sort of a scholastic, creative, and I don't know, psychological understanding of these things, and I want to share them through books. And I'll still do broadcasts and I'll still do videos. And if I have book launches, I will make public appearances. But otherwise, that world is over for me now, and I'm off on something new. I'm very, very comfortable with the idea of following this path, because I think in many ways it's led me to this point. I guess AV6 this weekend will be a combination of two things: a farewell to the previous work I'd done and a hello to where I'm heading now. And so I look forward to seeing many of you there, and I hope we have a great time. I know it's going to be recorded for video, and I hope you get a lot from that. So that's tonight's show. It was a brief, very, very brief introduction. That's because basically I have to acknowledge that, this is an international audience who are not familiar with these things. So I haven't rushed through it as I normally would, but I do hope you've got something from it, especially to see the power of the female and the goddess within ancient structures, and how that has been taken from us by monotheism from the Middle East, which began with Zoroastrianism, the creation of duality, and from that, the idea of the kind of biblical God, the biblical devil, good and bad, no grey area in between, which has left us in an appalling state and damages people to this day, because unlike Finn and Dermot, they don't learn the lesson of understanding, and we all need to learn it, because life is filled with grey areas. And thank you very much for joining me into this grey area of the ethereal Gaelic mist. Thank you. My name is Thomas Sheridan. This is The Velocity of Now, and I'll see you next time. And feck 'em if they can take a joke.